Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the IEEE Forms of the Future podcast. My name is David Stankiewicz. I'm an event producer and digital event strategist for IEEE's CEE, that's Conferences, Events, and Experiences team. And I am very lucky to be joined for my next session by Allison Marsh. Allison is a professor at the University of South Carolina, and I came to learn of her a few months back when she wrote a really fascinating article for IEEE Spectrum. This appeared in the November 13th version of IEEE Spectrum. Very quick read. It's called The First Virtual Meeting Was in 1916, the amazing feat that linked up 5,100 engineers from Atlanta to San Francisco. So needless to say, that caught my attention, being a digital event strategist working in virtual and digital events. The title intrigued me. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, can you talk about this, especially since IEEE last year in 2024 was celebrating its 140th anniversary. I thought this was really timely. For those of you who don't know, IEEE Spectrum is the organization's award-winning technology magazine. It's actually the flagship publication of IEEE. And IEEE, as you know, is the world's largest professional organization devoted to engineering and the applied sciences. IEEE's predecessor was AIEE, and they were the actual hosts of this first ever virtual meeting. So Allison, welcome to my show. Thanks for doing my podcast. Can you start off just by telling the audience a little bit about who you are and what your background is?
Sure thing, David. So I'm Allison Marsh, and I am both an engineer as well as a historian. So I am a senior member of IEEE, but my day job is really as a historian of technology, specifically as a historian of electrical and computer engineering. And so this year I'm on sabbatical from the University of South Carolina, and I'm spending it at the Linda Hall Library in Kansas City, where I'm doing research on women in the history of the organization in the early decades of the profession of electrical engineering. And the way I'm doing the research is really going systematically through a lot of the early journals in the field. And that's when I happened upon this description of this really fascinating meeting. And I was like, wait a minute, this is the first virtual meeting out there. And it's about 100 years before anyone thought it really existed. I have to write something about
it. Fascinating for sure. And when I read the article, I was like, Zoom happened in there were virtual meetings 100 plus years ago. This is amazing. Let me dive deeper. And we in IEEE CEE, we're particularly trying to focus a little bit more on some of the history of IEEE, milestones, engineering feats, this being certainly one of them. So let me ask you first, Allison, out of that story, are there any really neat or special sort of documented anecdotes or personal stories from some of the attendees who were a part of that meeting that you could share with my audience?
You're not going to like my answer because the answer is unfortunately no. And that's one of the biggest challenges about being a historian is that, I came across this great, very detailed summary, but it's not actually filled with any quotations from any of the participants. And so then I did, my diligence as a historian, and I started looking through newspapers that covered the event. And those lazy journalists back in 1916 also didn't seem to interview anyone. But hope is not lost because, as you can tell, there were a lot of many famous men at that meeting. Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Watson. These people have had their papers preserved in archives. And, it would take a lot of digging, but there might be a diary or a letter or something that describes what it was like to be a part of this historic meeting. I just haven't had the time or the resources to find that yet.
But it did happen. I mean, we know it took place, right? There's a record of it. So that's the fun part about this. And I mentioned this at the start, AIEE was IEEE's predecessor. Some of the big names that were a part of this meeting, people may know about. In fact, there's a really cool graphic which leads off your article, Alexander Graham Bell and J.J. Carty and others. And it connected, Allison, really quick, going to go off script just for a minute, connected how many cities and how did all those connections work?
Going down the East Coast, it was Boston, New York, Philly, Atlanta, Chicago from the Midwest, and San Francisco on the West Coast. But then there were also two extra cities who just happened to listen in. That was Salt Lake City and Denver. And the way this meeting happened, it's not a virtual meeting the way we see Zoom today, where we can see everybody's faces. This was done by linking everybody through telephone. And what is fascinating is that the first, intercontinental telephone call had just taken place 1 year previously. So this is a really big event to try to link up 6 cities. And the way it worked there was, there was everybody met in auditoriums in the various host cities, and every person had their own receiver placed at their seat that they could link over their ear so that they could hear everything that was happening. But of course, all of the participants could not just chime in at any point. That would be a cacophony. So only the hosts, usually the section leaders or invited guests would get the actual speaker to allow to talk to each other.
Yeah, not too dissimilar from today's Zoom, where you can be very selective in who speaks, who doesn't, who raises a hand, who asks a question, who can only chat. It's correct. It's so funny to see that sort of come full circle. And just to piggyback off of that and Zoom functionality, if we liken it to today's virtual meetings, there were quote unquote breakout sessions. People were, cut off from the main feed or the main line and doing things in their own host city. Can you talk about that? That's really cool.
Yeah, no, I love this. So, the first thing that happens is this meeting is they have a call to order and everybody chimes in, mostly saying, hey, we're here. Can you hear us? Just like we do today. And they had some opening remarks, but then at the 30-minute mark, they cut the lines and every city had their own guest speakers. All of the guest speakers were asked to sort of talk on the same topic. So there was a little bit of consistency. And it was really about how great electrical engineering is and what is the future. So, a really nice boosterism of talk to each one. And then 30 minutes later, they said, okay, we're going to reconnect everybody. And they brought everyone back together. So yes, very similar to how we have breakout sessions today.
So out of that first meeting, if you could, Allison, can you talk about maybe what elements from that 1916 meeting can be applied today to enrich today's virtual meetings? We've already talked about sort of how we replicate some of those features from over 100 years ago. What can we learn from that meeting? What did that meeting teach us that can enrich 2025 virtual meetings as we, continue to connect in this fashion?
Yeah. I mean, there are a number of, couple of different things that I would think about on this. It allowed people to be together as well as being a part of something bigger. So something I can imagine going forward in some of our large meetings is that there have some technical hubs where people can connect with each other instead of just logging in individually from their home computer. Of course, the big problem with that is that no one has solved the problem of time zones. That's still running into problems today. Another thing that I would actually really like to see brought back is that this original meeting, they had a break for entertainment. And the engineers in 1916 took their entertainment very, very seriously. At all of their annual meetings, they always had field trips, they had parties, they had dinner dances. And at this meeting, they had what I would just call a musical interlude, where every single city got to pick their own song, where they played it over the phonograph, over the telephone lines to each other. And, it was a way to express a little bit of regionality to each other. So say, this is who we are, but we are part of this greater organization. And I would love to see a little bit more of that entertainment brought back to our virtual meetings, because I have been in a number of conferences where it's just speaker, or technical session, paper. And, there's not any kind of interactivity where you actually have that social aspect of the meetings. And I would really like to see some of our virtual meetings today have that little bit of creativity, it has nothing to do with the meeting itself except to bring people together.
Yeah, I like that, and give each participant, host city, destination a little bit of individuality. Like this is why we're different. This is who we are. This is what we're about. That's really cool. And there's a lot of different softwares emerging now that can add elements of this to your virtual meeting. So it's not so stale. And in fact, one of the quotes that I think you wrote in your article was, "I suspect no one in attendance would have predicted that in the 21st century, people would groan at the thought of another virtual meeting," which is what happens now because it's speaker after speaker, it's death by PowerPoint, and you're falling asleep behind your laptop. We have to think of new ways and creative ways to keep people engaged. That's awesome. So one of the facts about the meeting, Allison, that you wrote was that there were 5,100 attendees across those different locations, including the President of the United States of America, which is an amazing keynote speaker to have, which created great excitement around this discovery. We just sort of came off of this, but just expand upon how we can create more of that enthusiasm today. Is it a rock star keynote speaker? Is it the engagement between the different participants or the music interludes or the breaks? What other enthusiasm can a 1916 telephonic virtual meeting teach us about how to inject that kind of energy into Zoom meetings of today?
Well, exactly. You mentioned that the president, Woodrow Wilson, he actually sent a telegram. He was like, "Hey, this is great. It's amazing what technology you are doing today. Way to go, engineers. You're the best." We could always reach out to folks and invite them to our meetings. And I'm not talking about inviting them to deeply technical sessions, although that would also be great. But usually there's an opening plenary or a keynote address that could reach a broader audience. Get that excitement out there so that people know sort of what the future looks like.
All right, Allison. I do this with all of my episodes, and I end my interviews with my interviewee looking into the future. The name of my podcast is Forms of the Future. So I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to do just that. Knowing what you know about today's, Zoom landscape and virtual meetings in 2025 and how far we've come, where do you see us going in the future, 5 years, 10 years out? Where do virtual meetings go from here, and what do they look like if you had your druthers about it?
Well, historians are notoriously terrible about predicting the future. We're much better at looking back at the past, but I'm a sci-fi fan, and sci-fi folks are really good at thinking about the future. And, I'm still waiting for the holograms or maybe some interactive VR. And of course, as I mentioned before, if we could try to somehow solve the time zone problem so that people don't have to be up in the middle of the night to catch our episodes, that would be great.
Some of that is actually already happening, and some of that's the hologram stuff and the interactive VR and AR, maybe XR, mixed reality. So I think you're onto something. I love that you said that you're a historian and you're better at looking into the past and into the future. I'm asking a historian to do predictions. How silly am I? But that was great. Thank you so much, Allison, for a great conversation today. I appreciate this. I hope my audience does. Again, read her article published in IEEE Spectrum back in November of 2024 about the first virtual meeting in 1916. It's a fascinating read. And to all my guests out there listening, appreciate you tuning in today for another edition of the IEEE Forms of the Future podcast. My name is David Stankwitz. Have a great day. If you would like to learn more about IEEE conferences, events, and experiences, or Forums of the Future, please visit our website at IEEEMCE.org and search Forums of the Future. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and YouTube.